This project, funded by the ESPA program, Participatory Modelling of Wellbeing Trade-Offs in coastal Kenya, is about using this system which we have here, which is the landing site in Nyali and the artisanal fisheries, to look at questions of ecosystem services and how there are trade-offs which have to be made. And by trade-off I mean that sometimes when you have try to increase one thing, something else is diminished. Here we have an example where a large marine park was put in place that increased the benefits from tourism and yet displaced fishermen from that area, so there was a trade-off there. But this project also identifies how even within a single ecosystem service, for example fisheries, depending on how the ecology is operating and the way in which we pressure the ecology, we get different types of ecosystem services coming out, and those benefits then flow to different people.
We are looking at a marine ecosystem as a capital, as a source of livelihood. And now when it comes to management, there are kind of 4 objectives that we have to look at: balancing employment, food security, income generation, and environmental conservation.
There are many trade-offs, but there's one trade-off which it's clear and complicated. There's been this big trade-off between the amount of fish that is coming out and the income, or rather the return per fisherman.
So this resource can be fished heavily using beach seines. You will reduce the biomass and the biodiversity in the seagrass beds, and you'll produce a large quantity of small fish. So fish production will go up, and the production of small fish, which poor consumers are able to buy, will be high. An alternative way of dealing with this fishery is that you have much lower fishing effort, you have many fewer people fishing, and you use a mixture of gears and you catch larger fish. Those people will be making lots more money, so the income per fisherman will be higher, even though there'll be less people employed. And the quality of the catch will be higher, so the value of that fish will be higher. And the ecological condition will be higher because there'll be less fishing pressure on it. And we've really managed to dig into that by doing ecological analysis, interviews with the different stakeholders that we have here about how they conceptualize their well-being, and secondary stakeholders about this system here. What are the influences? What are the outside factors like population changes, like changes in tourism, like changes in the Kenyan economy, how they affect what happens here, and how that ultimately leads to benefits, winners and losers.
The stakeholders we focused on in this project included the fishermen who used beach seine, a large small mesh gear which is illegal. We also had fishermen who used other kinds of fishing gears, such as spear gun, gill net and traps. And we were interested in the people who buy and sell the fish. These included male traders who focused mostly on more expensive fish, and female fishmongers who buy smaller, cheaper fish. These women are called mama karanga locally. To explore how these stakeholders' well-being is affected by ecosystem services, we had to start by understanding the dynamics of the ecosystem. So EcoPath with EcoSim is a computer model which represents the food web within the marine ecosystem and the effects of fishing.
When we use ecological modeling tools, we try to look at how these species are caught by the various gears in various amounts, and enter this in EcoPath together with ecological study parameters like biomass, and let the model estimate other parameters. And among objectives, you find that maximizing for one causes a change in the others that may not be appealing to the stakeholders. So you find that like when you maximize for ecology, you have to reduce something like employment, or you have to reduce certain kinds of gears, or you have to compromise on some economic margin. There is no win-win situation.
The P-Mowtick project looks specifically at wellbeing trade-offs. It gives you a much richer understanding of what is actually being traded in these decisions. Not just in terms of jobs lost or gained, for example, but about how different decisions in the coastal zone have affected things like social relationships between different groups of people, how they feel about their own lives, things that they feel angry about. A lot of the discussions we had about well-being were about lack of power that people have in decision making. And so the questions that the wellbeing approach then present us with was, well, what does that mean in terms of social well-being? So what does that mean in terms of how people get on with each other?
It's important to get different people's perspectives on what the trade-offs are, because these ideas will be socially constructed, different people will have a different perspective. And also, if we want to inform any type of decision-making process, then we want that process to be informed by people's priorities, people's views, but also potentially to be supported by people. Workshop 2 was a really exciting opportunity to sort of open up this consideration of the range of ecosystem services and the range of different stakeholders and how they were linked. And so to draw this complex systems diagram and to get people to actually talk about the interactions and the interlinkages. And of course then you could use that co-created system to open up a discussion about how lives, livelihoods, ecosystems were changing. And then to start constructing these scenarios based on the drivers.
We came up with scenarios to engage the stakeholders to think about the future. These scenarios were qualitative stories which incorporated the different drivers of change which the stakeholders had told us about. The scenarios represented different futures according to different changes in population, in the governance regime, in the state of the Kenyan economy, and in the development of the fishery.
There were 4 scenarios. One, where the government had no restriction on the fishing activities. The people we interviewed, many of them, in fact, they tagged this and they gave it a name that Kenya Huru, where everybody is free to do. And they're saying that this is the current situation which is happening. And it's not a very good situation because in the next few, maybe 1 to 2 years, then the resource will be depleted, then everybody will be in problem. Then in picture D, they designed a powered boat, some good office for the BMU, with some good coolers, fridges. So this is where we want to lead to. I think the pictures worked well. It depends on how one can work his mind into the positive development.
In contrast to the scenarios, which were qualitative and descriptive, we made a reductionist toy model. And this was a simulation model of the whole social ecological system. It had a simple representation of the ecology, it had the drivers in terms of economy and governance and population, and it had the well-being benefits to the different stakeholders, as well as the different management objectives in the fishery. And it allowed stakeholders in our participatory workshops to look at the dynamics of the overall system and think about the trade-offs which emerged from it.
We were trying to make them understand the difference between the model and a real thing. So it's a tool for understanding reality. After they understood what the toy model was, they were invited to try and play with it. We were thinking of a way of engaging people and making it interesting. So we said we'll have 6 people representing the 6 groups that the model depicts. We had the 6 sitting in front, and they had placards with the one side showing that they are happy, the other side showing that they are sad. We'd invite one member of the bigger crowd and tell them, okay, look, you're the Minister of Fisheries, and now your work is to try and control the actions of the fishers so that the results will make everyone happy. So by playing with the model, they reduce the number of beach seines and increase the number of other gear fishers. We'd ask the 6 people representing the 6 groups, are you happy or not happy? And then they lift up a card. For instance, the small, the Mama Karanga would say, no, I'm not happy. The trader will say, I'm happy. And then we tell them, okay, look, your decision does not look like it's made many people happy. Can you try and change your policies and try and make different decisions? The model is reinforcing the fact that there are trade-offs.
Model came out as a thinking tool. You cannot use them to make decisions, but it made them start thinking deeply into one problem and thinking more about it. Classical example is about the use of beach seine.
The model doesn't say that beach seine is bad, it says that there are trade-offs depending on the things that you are going to prioritize.
To help the stakeholders think about the hard choices which are presented by trade-offs, we asked them to vote on which values should be prioritised when making decisions about the fishery.
We had the total catch, the catch per fisher and the earnings per fisher, the total employment provided by the fishery, equity between people and fairness, and we had the quality of the environment. One single vote out of maybe 100 on income per individual fisher, and by a long shot the quality of the environment was voted for in favour, and so that was a real surprise to me, because I think if I was a fisherman here I would be most concerned about my individual earnings. I wonder whether that is some kind of expression of solidarity, and did the situation in which we were in influence that vote. We were asking a highly political question, whether you're going to prioritise everybody doing okay or allowing a few people to become more professional. Local politics is going to play a very strong role in what is prioritised.
People identify the trade-offs, and therefore realizing that for me to benefit, so-and-so also has to benefit. They started thinking we have to do it together. If you are dealing with these stakeholders without thinking the trade-offs, basically you are going to land into conflict, because the trade-off was important to show you how far or how fast or how wide you can pursue your well-being into a system.
You could see a group of people who have sometimes the same interests, sometimes differing interests, trying to grapple with the complicated ecosystem dynamics, trying to understand, each trying to look out for their own livelihoods and to clothe and school their own children, and in all this complexity try to agree and negotiate and decide a collective way forward.
We have to acknowledge that trade-offs will always be there, and there's no way you can actually have a completely win-win situation in a natural ecosystem where people are dependent on the resource, and people will always want to get more for their own income, their own occupation, and for their own food security. And still you find that even amongst those who want to use the resource, they are still talking about caring for the environment. The challenge here that needs to be addressed is actually how to agree on the management of the system